being a big sister, I blame my siblings for a lot of things. But the thing I blame them for the most is how I ended up working with food. About 10 years ago, my brother was working as a chef, my sister was working as a nutritionist, and I was in grad school studying communication and female politicians. Well, one night, we were sitting out on the back porch, and they were doing what they do best, making fun of me. You see, I look like our dad, and they look like our mom. To offer you an illustration, my big birthday party. As you can see, I've got all the Eastern European genes going on over here, and they've got the good old Western ones over there. So I've spent most of my life being reminded that I don't exactly look like my siblings. And on that night, their mockery had reached a whole new level. Because now, not only did I not look like them, but I was working in a field completely unrelated to what they were doing with food. So, in one of those turning point moments of life, I looked at them and I said, fine, I'll start studying you. The very next day, I started a food and communication project where my sister had a job as a nutritionist. Since then, I've studied school meal programs, urban farms and community gardens, food policy, farmers markets, and food trucks. Throughout my life, I've had the opportunity to plug into our food system in a lot of unique and different ways. And that's what brought me here today, to talk with you about food. But if anything goes wrong over the next few minutes, we can always blame my siblings. If there's one thing that I can tell you about my research, it's that we all have to eat. And that's not going to change in the future. Regardless of how everything else changes, we all have to eat. So during our time together, let's start a conversation about food. This conversation won't always be easy. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported in their 2013 Family Food Plan that the average cost of feeding a family of 4 has increased from about $123 a week in 2007 to about $145 a week in 2012. The USDA also reports that about 49 million Americans are food insecure, which means that about 1 in 6 people are having a tough time keeping up with this rising cost of food. But people can be pretty resourceful when it comes to making food choices. And my hope for the future is that we can all actually work together as neighbors and build a more vibrant food system. From the people who grow the food to the people who sell it in the grocery store. A system where everyone has easy access to affordable and healthy food, regardless of where they live or what their income level might be. Although we can blame my siblings for getting me into food, the strange irony is that both of them got out of food and went on to other careers. But I was hooked on food. And in 2007, I had finished graduate school, was looking for my first professor job, and I ended up in Greensboro. The timing couldn't have been more serendipitous, because in 2012, the Food Research and Action Center named Greensboro High Point as the #4 most food insecure metropolitan region in the entire United States. By 2013, we were tied for second with New Orleans. As I looked a little closer at the 2013 rankings, I noticed that Bakersfield, California is #1. Fresno, California is #5. Hold on a minute. These two cities anchor the top 2 most agriculture-producing counties in the entire United States. And the Food Research and Action Center has them in their top 5 most food insecure. In fact, Greensboro, High Point, and New Orleans both have year-round growing seasons. So some of our most severe instances of this problem are happening in places where we grow food. Because food insecurity is about more than just access and where we grow food. It's also about poverty. But it's a whole lot easier to talk about access than it is to talk about poverty. And I don't have to be a communications professor to tell you that. But that's where our problem lies, at the intersection of poverty and access. And the USDA agrees with me, most of the time, because they made these concepts their focus when they started mapping food deserts. To qualify as a food desert, the USDA says that the census tract where you live has to meet 2 terms. Basically, your neighborhood has to be both low income and low access, meaning that a certain number of people live below the poverty line, and at least 1/3 of you live more than a mile from a grocery store. The USDA has been mapping food deserts for the past 3 years, using an interactive website that they now call the Food Access Research Atlas. So let's take a look at where the food deserts are here in Guilford County. In Guilford, we have 24 food deserts. They were first mapped by my friend Mark Smith, an epidemiologist for the County Department of Public Health. He also noted that the Guilford County food deserts are clustered in areas with the highest rates of poverty, the highest concentrations of racial and ethnic minorities, and the highest rates of chronic health problems. When you look at the national data, we learn that 23.5 million Americans now live in food deserts. That's almost the population of Texas. And many of them live in low-income areas without reliable transportation. Which kind of makes that whole traveling more than a mile to get to a grocery store a bit more of a challenge. When you start talking about things like food deserts and poverty and access, you realize pretty quickly that you're in the middle of a pretty complicated conversation. But it's a conversation that we need to have, because we need to recognize that food is a systems issue. Sure, it sounds simple, but it's really not easy to make sure that people have access to affordable food. But when we realize that food is a systems issue, we start to recognize all of the pieces that have to work together. Here's one way of thinking about it. Let's start up at the top with producers. First, you have to grow the food. You have to make the ingredients. A lot of times, but not always, this happens on a farm. Sometimes you have to transport the food. You have to take it from the farm to various other points in the food system. On occasion, you transform the food. You turn the tomatoes into salsa, the cucumbers into pickles, the flour, butter, and sugar into delicious baked goods. Then, you often package the food and sell it at a retail location. Well, then you get to eat, which for most of us is the best part. Finally, you deal with the leftovers through practices like composting. On top of this process are several external factors, including financial, like the rising cost of food, context and environment, like the ongoing drought in California, political, like our federal farm bill or food assistance programs, and social cultural, like family food traditions. To make sure that food systems are working at their best, communities across the country are starting to develop local food policy councils. Food councils are made up of everyday people who are in our local food systems. A lot of times, food systems and their food councils are organized at the county level, and they date back to 1982, when the first food council was established in Knoxville, Tennessee. We've seen a recent surge at the county level, making us realize that food councils might be a really viable solution for us to consider. Because when you realize that food is a systems issue, you realize it's also a communication issue. And the entire point of food councils is to make sure that all of these pieces of our food system are talking to each other. But that only starts the conversation. And while I wish I could have solved poverty in the first 5 minutes of this talk, and then fixed food deserts in the next 5, so that we could spend the rest of our time together swapping recipes, not even I have that kind of superpower. What I can do is give you some ideas that I think are worth sharing when it comes to building a more vibrant food system. First, make food mobile. Across the United States, people are taking old school buses and delivery trucks and converting them into mobile food units that take food directly into food deserts. Here's a picture from the Fresh Truck in Boston, Massachusetts. As you can see, they've ripped out all of the old school bus seats and replaced them with a mini grocery store right inside the bus. Mobile farmers markets are important for a couple of reasons. They provide an entrepreneurial and cost-effective solution that gets food to people who need it. They also provide a break for low-income people who are already struggling when it comes to navigating an overly demanding food system. Next, build an oasis. Food deserts have given us more than just an overly clever metaphor. They've given us an effective way to talk about neighborhoods that are facing real barriers when it comes to food security. So let's work that metaphor and build an oasis. Communities like Detroit and Milwaukee and Chicago have broken the mold when it comes to developing urban farms and local markets right inside food deserts. Their approach is not only to help grow food in the neighborhoods that need it, but also to create jobs that help lift people out of poverty. Right here in Greensboro, we have the City Oasis project at Warnersville. This project involves a very dense community network from many people in our food system. It includes community members, some local nonprofits, 2 local universities, the Guilford County Department of Public Health, and a neighborhood church. It just so happens that the neighborhood church sits on 3 acres of farmable land, right inside one of the hardest hit food deserts in all of Greensboro. So we're turning it into an urban farm, complete with hoop houses and a farmer's market. If it works in this neighborhood, the goal is to take it to other food deserts, so they can develop their own oasis. Finally, share food. This can be something as simple as putting a donation row in a community garden, or making an extra meal for a family member or a neighbor who needs it. It can also be a slightly bigger idea, like a project called Ethnosh. Every month, Ethnosh hosts a meetup at a local ethnic restaurant, something that they like to call a nosh-up. Guests get a $5 plate of food and a healthy dose of community. But they also get to hear the stories of the owners, many of whom are immigrants and refugees. The owners, in turn, get a chance to expose their restaurant to the larger community and a one-time infusion of funds. When we share food as communities, we give ourselves the opportunity to put these pieces of our food system to work. We give this person a chance to talk to that person, and that person a chance to talk with this person. For the entire network to work together, break down barriers, and build a better food system. So, talk to a farmer about his chickens. Ask someone who lives in a food desert about her favorite recipe for peach ice cream. Follow a food truck. When we start conversations around food, we build stronger relationships between the people who are in this food system. And we lay a firm foundation for a more vibrant future.